friends, and welcome to the School Librarian Learning Network podcast. I'm Steve Tatro, also known as Dr. T Loves Books, and I love talking about all things related to school libraries. I may be an old dog, but I'm always trying to learn new tricks. In each episode of the SLLN podcast, I'll chat with a school librarian about a lesson they love. Hopefully, this can be a place for school librarians to get ideas and find new ways to engage with their students and staff. As a good friend likes to say, we're better together. So I hope this podcast will help school librarians connect with and learn from each other. The opinions and ideas shared in this podcast by myself and my guests are our own and do not reflect those of our school districts. And because school librarians always strive to be good digital citizens, I cite sources when using material that is not my own. Without further ado, let's get to this week's episode. Welcome back, everybody. I am so excited. I am getting to talk to a sort of a surprise guest almost. So I am very excited about this. Laurie, thank you so much for joining me today. Why don't you take a second and tell everybody who you are, where you're at?
So I'm Laurie Stansbury. I'm here in the Knoxville, Tennessee area, and I'm so excited to be here. Oh my goodness.
I'm so excited to have you. There's a little bit of schedule shuffling, and I was looking for someone to help me fill a little hole in the recording schedule, and Laurie was so kind to offer to take some of her time while she's on vacation to share a lesson. And it's a really, as she was telling me about this lesson, I am very excited and interested to hear about how this plays out. So before we dive into it, let's just take a second and maybe set the stage. How did you end up getting into school librarianship?
Sure. So I've been an educator for 18 years.
Nice.
And when I started, I was an English teacher in high school, and it was very quickly, wow, I don't particularly care for grading. This is not quite what I signed up for. And it was 14 years before I finished library school and made that transition. And so now I'm in an elementary library, and I absolutely love it.
Wow.
Been there 4 years, so.
That's a day and night transition from high school down to the little ones. Boy, more power
Yeah.
to you.
Oh, yeah.
They got a lot of energy down at the lower levels. So where did this lesson come from? Before we get into the lesson itself, like what was sort of the genesis of it?
So my first year as a librarian was the COVID year. Oh, my goodness.
Wow.
And I'm new to elementary. I'm new to all these kids. So I leaned hard on my strengths. And one, I was very comfortable with Canvas. That was the learning LMS that our school district used, because I used it in college and I used it a little bit when I taught high school. So I knew I could use that as a comfort zone. And the second thing was I grew up in the Southwest, and I moved around a little bit, not too much. But I had this deep appreciation for all things culture and community because I lived around a military base.
Oh,
So I thought, well, what can I do to make my library better? Uh, we have 20 different spoken languages at our school.
wow.
Yeah. So I thought, oh my goodness, what if I got bilingual books for my students that were in their native languages that they could share with others. They could practice their English, they could practice their native language. And our local education foundation that supports our school district loved my idea, and they gave me $5,000
Wow.
to start up a book club that was virtual with Canvas and with our LMS. And I also taught languages in my library lessons. So some of them were a little bit bilingual. And it was a phenomenal way to introduce myself and get the kids
Yeah.
excited. And this is one of the lessons that came out of that.
Oh, wow. That
Yeah.
is so great. Wow. I mean, I'm not surprised that they wanted to give you money for this program because this is a brilliant idea, but like that's a nice little chunk of money they gave you for this.
Oh, yeah.
So, all right. We know where the lesson came from. Now tell us a little bit about the lesson. Like how does this unfold? Maybe I'm a student and then I come into the library. What am I going to see? How's this going to go?
Well, if I started it traditionally as a unit, I would introduce the concept of language learning and being comfortable with not understanding everything. When I originally taught it, was the fourth lesson that I gave to my students. They would have
Okay.
already heard a made-up bug language from the book Do Is Talk by
Oh,
Carson Ellis.
such a good book.
They would have heard a bilingual story by Yugi Morales. We had taught Dreamers, and they got to hear
Okay.
it in English and Spanish.
Nice.
And we talked about tone and how the meaning, and then my Spanish students could share that, yeah, there was a slight difference in meaning, but it is a picture book. So the complexity and depth of language, maybe not as strong as, say, reading 2 novels. And then we got into the Arabic Quilt, which is by Aya Khalil, and I'm pretty confident I'm saying that right. She is from the Ohio area,
Okay.
and this was her debut picture book, and in it, she explores the idea that this Egyptian American has come to a new school, and she's unsure, and she's sharing her loves, and her love is her Egyptian culture, her grandmother, her quilt her grandmother made her, and the little girl, writes poetry, and as she gets into her classroom, she encounters a student who's not open to new culture and doesn't understand that there's cultural differences,
Hmm.
and, they end up doing this amazing school project where every student in the class gets an Arabic name from the student's mothers or the class did.
Oh,
And they make their own Arabic quilt of names, in Arabic with, beautiful designs and put it on the bulletin board, and, I thought, "Oh my gosh, we have to do this."
that is a beautiful story.
Mhm,
Wow. Is that, it's not a title that I've heard before. Is that
mhm.
like a newer title?
It's, I'd have to look up
Sorry, I didn't
how
mean to put
long.
you on the spot like that. That's okay.
Yeah. It's I'd say in the last, well, obviously, I taught this first 4 years ago, so it's
Okay.
definitely within that under 10 years,
Okay.
and the author has since wrote a follow-up, and it explores the idea of banned books
Oh.
in elementary and middle school, and the main character in her story, Kenzie, which I didn't mention her name earlier, Kenzie, encounters the community has just banned her favorite book, and its characters just look like her, and there's why are
Oh.
they banning the book if
Yeah.
it's multicultural, a different culture? So, it's a nice follow-up to that, something that's very relevant that the author saw in the news and felt compelled to write about.
Yeah. Boy. Well, now I've got 2 new books to add to my list of books to bring to my library. I love that. Um, wow. Okay. So you read the story with the students, and once they've heard the story, I'm assuming that there's maybe some conversation as they're going about how this might connect with them in some way.
Right, before I read the story, I'd introduce the concept of being bilingual,
Oh,
and
okay.
I ask the kids, "What does bilingual mean?" And usually someone in the room, knows. The first year I taught it 2nd to or 3rd through 5th, and then I've been teaching it to 3rd grade ever since.
Okay.
And usually they know what bilingual means, especially there will usually be someone in there. Um, and if you don't know, quite a few don't know.
Hmm.
And we talk about how exciting that is. Now, I found an amazing audio recording of this book on YouTube, and librarians, I know you wanna read this book with your kids, and you can, but there are 2 parts of the YouTube video I'm gonna share with you that you wanna share with your students. And the first part is the narrator, begins her video in Arabic,
Oh.
and then she immediately translates into English, so the kids get to hear Arabic, hear that English translation, and I always replay it. I said, "Let's hear that again, isn't that a beautiful language?" And so they
Yeah.
get to hear that beautiful greeting in Arabic.
Oh, wow. That's awesome. Oh,
Yeah.
that's such a great resource to add to this lesson too. Like on
Mhm.
top of just a great lesson, here's a great little additional piece that you can throw in there.
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
And then later on in the story, there is a moment where the classroom teacher in the picture book, connects 4 words that were introduced to English from Arabic, and the narrator of the audio recording does a quick little aside and not only says, "You know, that's right," but she pronounces each of those words in Arabic.
Hmm.
And what I love is I ask my kids who speak other languages, "Are you hearing does it sound like a word in your language? And my
Mm.
Spanish students are like, yes, yes. And my Ukrainian, yes, yes. I think even one of my French students got excited. And they'll tell us that native word that connects to the Arabic word that connects to the English word. And then my students get to see how all the languages connect.
Oh, that's so great. I
Yeah.
love that idea of introducing the kids to this idea of like the cognates of various languages because that's for me, I am not great at languages other than English, but the one hook that usually got me through when I had like a Spanish class was at least there's some words that are sort of similar to English, or like I know the Latin root that goes to the Spanish root, like getting the kids to realize we may have separate languages, but there are connections between them. That's such a great thread to build. Oh, wow. Nice.
Mhm.
That's so cool. Hmm. Okay. So awesome. Two great resources built in as you're sharing the story with the students. Okay. And they're thinking about bilingualism, which is excellent.
Mhm.
It's funny that you bring up bilingualism, and I'm going to go off on a little bit of a tangent, and I apologize in advance, but it's so funny because today, for some reason, it was in my head that um, we refer to bilingual, and we kind of think of if you speak more than English, you're bilingual. And we know that the root of bilingual is two languages. And so the default is, I think, and this is maybe just my own preconception, but in America, we tend to think of it as you speak English and you maybe speak one other language. And like we used to talk about our students as English as a second language students,
Mhm.
but now we'd refer to them as ELL, English language learners, because so many of them have so many more languages than just their home language and English. And I think we've got this sort of bias that we were sort of amazed and surprised when people can speak more than home language and maybe one other language. And yet some of these kids are so multilingual. It boggles the mind. So to introduce the kids to these concepts and get them thinking about the fact that, yes, there may be people who speak an other language, but there's also people who are going to speak so many more than just one other language. And we can take part in that. We can become part of those different languages and take part in those conversations. That's so wonderful. Hmm.
Mhm. Absolutely. I introduced the word polyglot right behind bilingual.
Ooh, nice. That's
Yep.
such a great word.
Yep.
That's so cool. So they're getting the idea of bilingual and polyglot and multilingual. I love that they're hearing some Arabic. I think that's something that probably isn't particularly familiar for a lot of kids. That's so wonderful. And then, so they're reading this story, or hearing about the story of how the students in the school get these Arabic names, and then they, I imagine that they maybe stitch them into the quilt. Did I get that right?
It's more of a bulletin board with,
Okay.
different shapes of colorful pictures of construction paper and designs the kids all do, and then
Gotcha.
you assemble it into a bulletin board quilt. Yeah, it's beautiful because we take the Kenzie's grandmother's quilt that was personally made for her, and then now they've shared their culture, both their language and the quilt with her classmates, which is just beautiful.
It is. It really is. So I'm going to apologize because I think in my head I have combined a couple of things that are separate. So in the story, the kids learn about Kenzie's grandmother's quilt,
Mhm.
and then you discuss with the students making a poster board quilt that's going to involve their names. So in the story, there's not a section about the students creating quilts with their other language names.
No, they do.
Okay, okay.
Absolutely do.
Sorry. I I thought I was blending things together
Nope.
incorrectly there. Okay, cool. So I love that they're. I mean, anytime you can bring a grandma in, that's just a win. Every kid's gonna think about their grandparents, so that's great. And the story itself just sounds so wonderfully eh, eh, uniting and just helping kids to see beyond what may seem like a really major difference to understand that, well, maybe that difference is not as big as you think it is, and maybe there's ways we can think about how to get past it with each other. Hmm.
Yeah, the author also explores the idea of a classmate who, as I said before, is not understanding and is confused and kind of makes fun of our
Hmm.
main character, Kenzie. And those some great opportunities for conversation about compassion and kindness and friendship. So there's some opportunities there as well.
That's so great. Huh. So you, at this point, having finished the story with the students and had these wonderful conversations, what is the next step for the students to engage in?
Um, as class time allows, I might roll into the second part, but usually I spread this between 2 libraries. We have 45 minutes, and my 3rd graders tend to take an a long amount of time to check out, which is a good problem.
Yeah, yeah.
So, the next time we meet, they would come in, and I would introduce them to what the concept is of translation versus transliteration. And I don't
Hmm.
hit on that word too hard with my kiddos. I just use the word translate. But translate is when you take a word and find out the meaning of it and then find the connecting word. Whereas transliterate would be to take your word and just pronounce it in the second language the same way you would in your original language.
Interesting. Okay. I I'm trying to wrap my mind around that. Okay,
Mhm,
so in other words, I just want to see if I've got this right. If I was reading a passage that was in Spanish, let's say,
mhm.
if I'm reading it, if I'm reading the words in Spanish, then I'm transliterating?
Um,
No.
so you're just so my name is the best way to do this.
Okay.
My name in Arabic sounds almost Laurie sounds almost exactly the same. That's
Okay.
transliteration.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
translation is when you find out Laurie actually means laurel
Oh.
from in the crown of laurel, the laurel leaves that
Yeah.
Julius Caesar and all the Romans wore.
Yeah.
So I take the word laurel, which is a noun, and translate that into Arabic, and then I get my Arabic name.
Ah, okay.
So
I
it has a
see.
different sound. It expresses the meaning of my name.
I see. Okay. Oh, wow. Okay. Huh. I honestly, I don't know how long I've been in education now. I never understood. I never would have realized there was a difference between those ways of looking at the language. That's so great. Thank
I
you for
must
teaching me
confess,
something.
I had to do research about this, and before we met today, I had to research to make sure I would explain it correctly.
No, that's great. Okay. Oh, I love it. Okay. So we talk about the difference
Mhm,
between translating and transliterating,
mhm.
and then where do the students go with that?
So I use a website called Behind the Name,
Hmm.
and it's a pretty good, robust resource. Now, there's going to be a lot of language that your students, if they're 3rd graders, will not understand. But
Hmm.
essentially, there's a clear heading that says you type in your name, and if your name is a diminutive or it originates from another name, there'll be a link. So Lori, I click on Laura, and then it gives me Laura or Lawrence, and I click Laura because I tell them I'm a girl, and my parents didn't name me after Lawrence, even though Lori is a nickname of Lawrence. And I get to Laura, and then I get to the meaning, which fortunately behind the name puts in quote marks. So it'll say meaning and history, and you can direct the kids to the quote mark part, and they can ignore all the rest of the language. And so hopefully, it's one word, but sometimes it's more than one. And so we have to finesse and play around a little bit to figure out what we're gonna translate.
Yeah.
So we take that meaning, and Laurel meant nothing to my kids. It means nothing to me. So I went to dictionary.com and looked up all the definitions, and that still didn't mean anything. So I took the kids to Kiddle, and honestly, if I did this again, I would look up a kid-friendly dictionary to do this.
Ah,
So I need to do that.
gotcha.
Um,
Although, kind of a nice lesson in like here's how we can do research. Like if we don't find what we need, let's try a different source. But
Mhm.
absolutely, like if for time's sake and for this lesson, it absolutely would make sense to, okay, we've got our resource lined up.
Right.
So I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. So you're
Not
going to
at
Kittle.
all. I take them to dictionary.com. We look up the definitions. We're still scratching our heads. We need a picture. So I Kittle because the images are curated for children. And now we've got some images that make sense. So
Ah,
there's a picture of three of the different definitions that connect to my name. And then there's a picture of the laurel wreath and crowns. And I pointed it and I say, this is what everyone says my name means. And they think that's really cool that I'm named after this crown.
yeah.
Um, so from there, we finally go to Google Translate, pop in the word laurel, and select Arabic, and we get to hear it pronounced, which is the best.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's such a great feature.
And then we move from Arabic, we can quickly click into other languages.
Right.
So, know your room. If you have a Russian speaker, you're translating into Russian.
Hmm.
If you have, and in this story, I didn't mention this earlier, but they classroom across the hall does the same project in Japanese.
Oh,
So
okay.
I translate to Japanese and, we translate to Spanish. It's fun. They get to hear it. The kids don't even care about putting their names on a quilt or on a piece of paper or a Google slide at this point. All they want to do is keep clicking and listening to their names in different languages, which
Yeah.
is a cacophony of noise, but it is joyful and excitement.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, that's all I would want to do. I'd just be playing around and seeing what my name sounds like. Oh,
Oh,
that's
for
really
sure.
neat. So, having heard their names, in theory, now that
Mhm.
they've got a translation, they're going to try and take that and make that part of a quilt that they're going to work with.
I have a simple Google slide with different little boxes, and it says, "This is my name, this is what my name means, this is the language, and that's the letters, the script," not a link to the pronunciation or anything, and then from there, the directions are decorate with pictures and shapes and whatever you want, and I never give them enough time to do all of that. I know they would have so much fun, but, just in terms of thinking of my 3rd graders, I don't think they have the stamina all the time for that, so
Yeah,
the
yeah,
year they do, I will do that, but
yeah.
so far, not so much.
Yeah. I mean, I could almost see that even just being an additional day of like, okay, we've learned what our words are and we've heard them in different ways. Take it home, think about it. What would you do for designs? And then like we'll come back and we'll do that another time. But that is so I am not a lower grades teacher, but I can see in my head the excitement and the activity as the kids are engaging with all of this. It's just, oh boy, that's got to be so wonderful.
Oh, it is. The kids, they get so excited. They share with me the words that they can say in other languages, even if it's only 2. They tell
Yeah.
me all about, "My grandmother speaks this language," or "My family speaks this language," and then the next visit, they're checking out my bilingual books left and right, trying to learn new
Nice.
languages. It's amazing.
That's awesome. Wow. And I mean, I've said it before and I'll say it a million times, I'm sure, but when you can get the kids authentically engaged with anything, they are going to dig into it so much more than we can do as like sage on the stage or even guide on the side. Like when they are authentically with it and into it and inquiring, oh my gosh, what a powerful learning tool that is. Oh boy, I am so excited for your students that they get to do this.
Oh, yeah. The very last thing I show them is I will take them back to the website behind the name, and at the top, there is a tab that says "Related Names," where they've already pulled the common versions of your name in several languages.
Oh.
And so you can see, I mean, Laura is Laura in almost every language, and I said, "Look, Icelandic, it's Lara." And that made me think of the Golden Compass every time. I'm like, "Oh, that was me! I did not know that."
That's so fun. I bet that a bunch of kids then are going around and saying, "Call me call me Ishmael." Well, probably not that, but oh boy. There's so much what I love about this is there's so much fun for the kids and and how they're going through this. Like it's such a joyful learning experience, it sounds like. Oh boy.
Oh, yeah, especially that anticipation where we read the story, we saw the project, the class across the hall did it in Japanese too, and we get to do it next week?
Yeah.
The next week, they are in their seats, ready to go.
Oh, I
Um,
bet.
Challenges I ran into. Some kids have names with non-traditional spellings, so you have to show them to type in a more traditional spelling.
Okay.
And some kids have some very unusual names that are unique, which is beautiful.
hmm
You may need to do a quick Google search on the side, or you may need to switch to transliteration for that friend.
Okay. Those are great points to bear in mind.
Yeah.
And I was going to ask you how you sort of differentiate for this, but I think the differentiation is completely built in. Like this lesson is all about differentiating because we're helping kids, whether there's a language issue or not, like we're
Mhm.
helping them find ways to sort of overcome barriers
Right.
that might be there.
Right. I definitely use table partners quite a bit. If a friend finishes early, I'll ask them to help their table friends or move on to another table and help everybody get caught up to the same step. Um, I'll run around with my phone and have Google Translate if I need to give the directions in another language.
Oh, yeah, that's a good
Um,
point.
yeah.
Hmm. That's I have relied on last year. I was relying on Google Translate a lot. We had some students who were very limited English proficient, and I did not speak a lick of Portuguese, and I was trying to communicate with this student, and we just would pass my phone back and forth with Google Translate going so that we could have conversations. That's such a great tool. Hmm. That's a nice one to have literally in your back pocket. You can have it ready to go.
Yeah. Yeah. For sure. It's always there.
Yeah. So clearly the students love this lesson.
They do.
Um, this have you had students come back to like later at some point later talk about this lesson and kind of like mention it as something that they remember or something that is sort of sticking out in their minds as something fun that they did?
So I've taught it several years. So at this point of the year, I put the Arabic quilt out on display, and my fourth graders and fifth graders will come in. I remember that book.
Nice.
Yeah, yeah.
That clearly lands. Like when they can
Mhm.
come back years later and talk about, oh yeah, I remember that. Have there been any reactions from the teachers? From how are there any ways that like the teachers have mentioned that it might be getting brought into their classes, or is there any like collaboration you do with the teachers as this goes along?
Well, I was doing a huge unit my very first year, and I can tell you that first year, because it was such a huge emphasis, we had a fourth grade classroom that did a homeroom study club to learn Spanish for their friends.
Wow,
Yeah.
that's awesome.
So if
Huh.
you make language and culture a focus for a unit, you will see the kids want to teach each other. They want to learn and they want to share.
And what a great way to put some of the agency in the hands of the kids who might be limited English proficient
Mhm.
to give them that authority and that ownership of some learning going on.
Oh, for sure. And the other thing that is huge is my Arabic culture students or Arabic speakers. Miss Stansbury, do you have any more books that are like this? So the answer is yes. I've got plenty in English. I've got plenty in Arabic. The majority of my students who are Arabic speaking are not Arabic reading, and it's a question of time and access,
hmm
and that's not unique to Arabic. There are other languages where the students may speak it quite fluently, but just haven't had access or the opportunity to learn how to read it in its written form.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's completely understandable.
Mhm.
But that's really great that they are interested in finding out more about their own language and culture in this way. That's such
Oh,
a
yeah.
nice, a great way for them to sort of engage further with their own culture. And I mean, what a great reflection for the, let's say, the English, native English speakers to be able to say, look, we can all learn more about our language and our culture and where this, even though we may think we know a lot, there's always more to learn.
Yeah,
Hmm.
I've had, requests to add languages, every year since. Greek was the one that surprised me. They wanted
Okay.
a friend had a Greek ancestry, and you heard his last name, and yes, he was Greek. So I had to add Greek, and then, Korean. I I
Interesting.
I don't have any English language learners who speak Korean, but I have families that do speak Korean, even though their children came to us speaking English. And
Yeah.
so that was one we had to add as well. which is pretty awesome.
Yeah. Man, that's great that you're getting that feedback too. Is that coming from parents?
Parents and students.
Okay.
So, some of our book fair volunteers,
Oh,
get to
gotcha.
see the collection. They're like, "When are you gonna add Korean?"
That's awesome. Wow, that's a great connection to the community too.
Mhm.
Boy.
Oh, yeah, our local Friends of the Library found out that I have an extensive collection because I made a post,
Mm,
and I haven't seen it as yet, but they're doing a feature in their local newsletter about our collection and how I've found French books at their local Friends of the Library bookstore.
that's
Eh
awesome.
yeah, I mean, if you need the resources, you can find them. You just have to do your homework and get in there.
Well, that's one area that we tend to excel at, our school librarians, so we'll track them down. So it seems like I mean, there's so many amazing pieces to this. Are there any particular pieces of advice? I mean, you've given so many great ones, but are there any particular piece of advice you might have for somebody who's gonna try this out for the first time?
Well, I would say that the antagonist in the Arabic quilt can be a little snotty and snooty and really be prepared for how you want to deliver it and discuss it.
Okay.
The narrator on the YouTube video does a great job, and I often find myself pulled away helping a kid make final checkout selections, or I might have a teacher come in. So I do hit play sometimes. Other times I will read the story myself.
Okay. That's great. That's good to know. Oh, man. Oh, I am I love this lesson and you're doing it with a really young group and it's really amazing that they are uh, connecting with it so well and I'm already starting to imagine ways you could even like age this up or use this in different kinds of ways or even exactly the same way with older populations too.
I will say, back in my high school teaching days, many, many years ago with juniors, I had a component of a research project we put together that used behind the name where the kids were asked to look at the history of their name. And they loved it just as much as the third graders do.
Oh, I bet. I
They were
bet.
very fascinated to find out not only what their name meant, but they could understand and appreciate the history of, oh, this famous person had this name, or it comes from this language or this culture or country. So,
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, aren't we all that self-centered? I want to know everything about me.
right?
But that's really cool. That's really cool. Oh, love it. Thank you so much for sharing this lesson. We're now going to go in a 90-degree turn and we're going to go to our book break.
Book break. Squiddy.
All right.
Anything you want to share can be for school, for personal, for kids, for adults, whatever you like. What's a great book that we should know about?
Well, all of our kids enjoy making videos and YouTube, and the Partition Project by Saadia Faruqi. And
Okay.
my deepest apologies. I practiced that name. I think I've got it correct. Is a fun little story. It's a middle grade novel that the main character, Maya, is in a class where she wants to learn about journalism, and they're going to make documentaries, film
Okay.
documentaries on a project of their choice. And
Hmm.
they're competing with their classmates to see which classmate will get the most views. So our
Love
main
it.
character, Maya, uh, is also having a concern. Her Pakistani grandmother has just moved into her home,
Hmm.
and while her grandmother is bilingual, um, she's feeling a little put out because her grandmother took her bedroom.
Ah.
And she's been asked to spend time with her after school, like she's babysitting grandma. And
Hmm.
so there's some tension there. But it turns out grandmother was a girl, 12 years old, the same age as Maya, um, during partition.
Hmm.
So you get to learn about a little bit of the India and Pakistan formation post World War II and the story of partition. Faruqi mentions other books, both for adults and middle grade readers, that explore the idea of partition in its in the narrative in such a beautiful, beautiful way. It's just laid out like, hey, here's the night diary. Here's and I can't remember the name of the other book, but I added it to my to be read on Goodreads.
Yeah.
Uh, And it's just beautifully done. And the history, very appropriate for our elementary readers. And if they want to know more, the Night Diary, which I also have in my school library, it gets a little bit heavier, more into the middle school reading. But I think the Partition Project with that 12-year-old narrator definitely appeals to that middle school age for sure.
Yeah. And that's an area I've got to admit that I am woefully ignorant about the actual history of partition. And I love the idea that there are some great books out there that are enjoyable to read on their own, but also you can learn something from them. And this sounds like one that I need to move higher up on my TBR list because it's on my list, but it's a little further down. So now I gotta bump that up.
Yeah, I gotta say thanks, Nick Galley, because I got to read it before it came out. So
That's awesome. Wow. So that is definitely, that sounds like something I need to not only have in my library, but I need to get it into my own hands as soon as I possibly can.
Oh yeah.
Awesome. That is great. Laurie, I cannot thank you enough for coming and sharing a great lesson, a great book, for taking your time during your vacation to share with us, to help me fill in. It has just been so wonderful. I'm so glad that we got to do this. So thank you a million times. If people want to track you down online to find out what you're up to, I know you're always doing awesome stuff, clearly. Where should they go? Where should they be looking for you?
I'm at Laurie Stansbury on Facebook, Twitter, now X, and Blue Sky. And then on Instagram, I'm Laurie Stansbury Librarian. And then on Facebook, because that's where my parents are, I have a school page, CBES, for Cedar Bluff Elementary School Library.
Gotcha. In my head, when you said that's where my parents are, I thought your personal parents were there, and I didn't make the connection at first that's why you had the school library one, but that totally makes sense. That's just me having a real brain fog there, but
You're there too.
Thank you again. I really, truly appreciate it. And hopefully we'll get to talk to you again sometime soon. I would love to do
You are
that if
so
you want.
welcome. You bring so much joy to library lessons and library world. And so thank you for putting this podcast out there and sharing so many amazing connections so we can all be stronger and better together.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks for checking out this episode of the SLLN podcast. Be sure to check out the show notes, which include not only a link to the lesson, but also links to the SLLN website, home to a curated list of free upcoming virtual events and resources for school librarians. It's easy to become a member of the network. Just visit the site and use what you like. If you have an idea, a question, or a lesson you want to share, you can email schoolliblearning@gmail.com. That's school, L-I-B, learning@gmail.com. Know someone with a great school library lesson? Let us know. Until next time, be safe, be good, and be well.